Picture a tanker sitting at anchor in the Persian Gulf. It has been there for weeks, fully loaded, going nowhere. Missiles and drones crossing the sky above it. It is one of hundreds. At one point, more than 500 merchant ships were stuck inside the Gulf, afraid to move. Then, for this one, an email lands. The sender is the Persian Gulf Strait Authority, a body Iran stood up in the middle of the war. It wants the ship's ownership records, its insurance, its cargo manifest, the names of everyone aboard, and it wants a fee, up to $2 million, before any escort will walk that vessel through the single narrow corridor Iran is willing to open. That email is the part of this story nobody is putting on the front page, because just days after notes like it went out, the President of the United States went online and declared he was fully authorizing the toll-free opening of the Strait of Hormuz, the very same strait, open and free. Iran's lead negotiator answered on state television. The strait, he said, will not return to pre-war conditions. Both men are describing the same piece of paper, the deal that ended the war. One calls it free passage for the ships of the world. The other calls it Iranian water with a fee attached. Only one of them is going to be right on day 61. Before we get into it, how a country that lost almost everything on the battlefield walked out of the negotiating room with the stronger hand, why the toll it plans to charge is collected in Chinese money, who actually gets trapped paying it, and what happens when the 60-day clock buried inside this agreement finally runs out. Because what the United States signed on June 17th isn't really a peace treaty, it's a 60-day rental, and the fine print left Iran holding the one thing the entire war was supposed to take away. The war Iran lost. Let's be honest about the battlefield first, because the headline makes no sense without it. By any military measure, Iran got wrecked. According to United States and Israeli assessments, the enrichment site at Natanz was roughly 3/4 destroyed. The buried complex at Fordow, the one Iran spent 2 decades hardening, was hit hard enough that for now the country has no working enrichment at all. Iran's navy was effectively eliminated. Its air defenses were gutted. Something like 85% of its defense industry was flattened, and its missile stockpile was largely spent down in the firing of it. And the economy underneath all that was already on its knees. The strait it shut down carries nearly a fifth of the world's oil, and when the war closed it, traffic through Hormuz collapsed by more than 90%. Iran's own export lifeline included. The bill to rebuild the country now runs somewhere between $400 billion and $1 trillion. Senior Iranian economists have reportedly told their own president that recovery will take a decade or more. So, hold on to this. That is not a victor's wreckage. Anyone telling you Iran came out of this war strong is selling something. Iran came out of this war broken, which is exactly what makes what happened next so strange. The treaty, Iran won. Because losing the war and losing the treaty turned out to be two completely different scoreboards. Look at what the settlement let Iran keep: a waiver to sell its oil again, the right to keep enriching uranium at some level on its own soil, no requirement to hand over its network of proxies, and on top of all that, a promise of at least $300 billion for reconstruction. The bombs were meant to end Iran's leverage. The document handed a piece of it back, and several of the terms Iran walked away with are things it once called existential red lines. But the single biggest thing Iran kept doesn't appear on any list of terms at all: the regime itself. The whole war was meant to shake the government in Tehran loose. It's still standing, and a government that survives a superpower's bombing campaign gets to call that survival a victory, whatever the rubble around it looks like. One analysis summed up the whole war in a single line: the Americans are talking of peace, the Iranians of victory, and the experts can't agree on the scoreboard either. Some argue Washington degraded Iran, but Tehran is the side that walks away with the most preserved in its regime, its missile know-how, its proxies still intact. Others land in the middle. Both sides will hold up a trophy, and both quietly lost something. The 60-day clock. But the clearest proof that Iran kept its leverage isn't in the punditry. It's written into the text itself. The agreement says Iran will allow passage with no charge for 60 days only. 60 days only. The strait isn't free. It's on a free trial. The deal even gives Iran 30 of those days just to clear its own mines and obstacles out of the water, so the genuinely open shipping lane barely exists before the trial is already half over. And Iran's own negotiators have said out loud that the fee returns the moment the window closes, because in their telling, the waterway will never go back to what it was before the war. So this isn't a loose end someone forgot to tie off. The countdown is the entire architecture. The deal didn't take Iran's hand off the valve. It just agreed not to look at it for 2 months. It's the diplomatic version of a store handing you a 0% card for 60 days and quietly hoping you don't read what the rate jumps to afterward. Paid in Chinese yuan. Now here's the thread almost nobody is pulling, and it's the most important one. When Iran charges that toll, it isn't billed in dollars. Ships pay in Chinese yuan, move through a Chinese state bank on China's own payment network, the one built specifically to run around the American banking system, with cryptocurrency as the backup channel. Think about what that means. Iran built a tollgate on a fifth of the world's oil and wired the cash register so the United States can't reach into it. And there's a quiet second prize in that design. Every barrel billed in yuan instead of dollars is one more small crack in the dollar's century-long grip on the oil trade. And the customer on the other end of most of those barrels is China itself. The money doesn't just dodge Washington, it loops home to Beijing. And it isn't a flat fee. The structure works out to roughly $1 a barrel, which on a fully loaded supertanker hauling 2 million barrels comes to about $2 million a crossing. There's a 5-tier ranking by nationality. Ships from China, Russia, India, Iraq, and Pakistan get waved through cheap or free, while anything tied to the United States or Israel is simply banned from the corridor at any price. Tally it up, and analysts estimate the system could pull in up to $20 million a day from tankers alone, and $600 to $800 million a month once the gas carriers are added back. By some reckonings, it's the first brand new toll forced onto a major international strait in over a century, and Washington's own sanctions warnings now say any company that pays it could be exposed to penalties. The piece, it turns out, runs on Beijing's plumbing. The trapped neighbors. So who actually pays this? Here's the trap, and it's pure geography. The Strait of Hormuz is about 21 nautical miles wide at the pinch point, and every inch of it falls inside either Iranian or Omani territorial water. There is no neutral high seas lane running down the middle. Inbound tankers thread through Iran's side. Outbound tankers slip past Oman's Musandam Peninsula, which juts toward Iran like a thumb. Whoever controls those two shores controls every barrel that enters or leaves the Gulf. And not every neighbor can route around it. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have pipelines that can shove some oil overland to other coasts, an escape hatch worth maybe 8.5 million barrels a day, but the strait normally carries around 20 million. The math doesn't close. And Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain have no hatch at all. For them, Hormuz is the only door out of the house. They either accept Iran's terms or they watch their economies seize. Worse for them, Oman, sharing that opposite shore, may decide it's simpler to join Iran in collecting than to fight it. That's the genius of a toll booth on a choke point. You don't need a stronger navy than your neighbors. You just need them to have nowhere else to drive. A broken Iran can still squeeze the richest economies in the Gulf, not because it won the war, but because geography never surrendered. And the bill doesn't stop at the Gulf. The lion's share of the oil squeezed through that strait feeds Asia's economies, which means a toll on Hormuz is really a quiet tax on the price of energy everywhere, felt eventually at gas pumps and electricity meters thousands of miles from Iran. Everything they didn't sign, and if all of this feels unfinished, that's because most of the agreement is a list of things that got postponed. The 14 points reopen the strait and stop the shooting. What they don't settle is nearly everything that started the fight. The stockpile of highly enriched uranium still sitting inside Iran, the ballistic missile program, the proxy network strung across the region. All of it shoved into the same 60-day window with no hard deadline attached, and none of the intrusive anywhere anytime inspections that the 2015 nuclear deal at least put on paper. The vice president insists America still holds all the cards, that Iran has to verify for the United States that it is changing its behavior. Maybe, but verification only means something if there's a hard line to verify against, and the hardest lines in this conflict still don't have one. A decade ago, it took 2 years of grinding negotiation to nail down a single nuclear accord. This deal gave itself 60 days to settle harder questions, with a war's worth of bad blood on both sides of the table. And ambiguity is not neutral. Each side will read the blank spaces in its own favor, which means the very same 60 days both governments are selling as a path to peace. Each is quietly treating as a countdown to the next round of pressure. The agreement didn't answer the big questions, it scheduled them, and bet that later would somehow be easier than now. What day 61 looks like. Which brings us to the collision this deal created and never resolved. Analysts describe the toll as a card the Islamic Republic could look to play again, whenever it wants. If Tehran slaps the fee back on at day 61, the agreement cracks in public, and the world watches a peace deal sprout a toll booth. If Iran instead holds the fee in its back pocket, it keeps a loaded weapon on the table for the nuclear talks that come next. Pay us, or the strait closes again. Heads it collects, tails it threatens. Either way, the conclusion is the same. The war did not pry Iran's grip off the strait. It handed that grip a signature and a calendar. A wrecked military, a bankrupt treasury, a regime that lost almost every battle, and still, somehow, a hand on the throttle of the global economy. That is not the peace those bombs were supposed to buy. Closing question. Do you think that Trump wants a memorandum of understanding with Iran just to lower oil prices to secure a strong economy and help Republicans win the midterms, only to go after Iran afterward? Given his long history of viewing Iran as a major threat to the United States, is this all part of a larger strategy? Our update continues. Stay tuned.